welcome back to the Restive Perspective, a show about Restive Ventures and our viewpoints on the market. And this is our second episode in a series really pulling to light the sessions that we did at a Go Restive event earlier this year, early 2025. I'm here with my partner, Ryan Falvey. Ryan, I know you already gave an interview about Go Restive. Folks can listen to our prior episode to go into it in more detail. But why don't we talk a little bit about Ethan, which is the person that you're interviewing in this session?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back. It's good to be back here.
You made it back for a second episode.
I made the cut, Ethan. Yeah, so I mean, we've both known Ethan for a very long time. Ethan was the founder of CEO of a company called Digit, which was probably one of the more influential fintech startups of kind of it was founded, I think, in 2014. So kind of the 2010s. And what they were doing was essentially helping people just automatically save. So they would scan your accounts, look for money that you might not miss, and would sweep it out. And then they would communicate via chatbot. So the early product didn't have an app or anything. It was just a straight up, chat interface. And so it'd be texting you and saying, hey, looks like you got some money to save, and it would save it, kind of tell you what we're doing. And it would just be like your buddy. It evolved to, have an app feature functionality to it. It became a lot more robust. They were doing other things in financial services besides just helping people save. But that idea of having a very conversational UI with the customer, it was the driver, honestly, of many of the chat apps that many banks now have. I mean, I think that obviously what you do with a chat GPT now is on a very different level of sophistication, but that idea was kind of something that was really kind of early on in a decade ago of just having this kind of natural conversational ability to communicate. And so Ethan had built this business, and we were very early investors in it. And then the company sold to Oportun a few years ago. It was a great exit. And Ethan took some time off after that. He stuck around for a while, took some time off, and then recently came out with his new business called Hero, which for people who are listening to this now, a couple months after we did this interview, we've announced that we are also investors in this company. And so this is basically taking Digit 2.0 and really taking it to the next level and bringing a lot more AI into the conversation, into the tool, helping you go not just saving, but really it's almost serving as your personal CFO to make financial decisions for you. And this conversation was really let's talk about that journey that he went through at Digit, and then how, when you see a real transformative generational change in technology, what can you do now? And this is such an interesting kind of story, and I think an interesting business of having a founder who, very clearly feels like he couldn't achieve everything he wanted to with the first business with Digit. And now the technology has changed so much that he's like, let's go. I want to do it again. I'm going to actually make it this what I want now. And I think that comes through in this interview really well, I think, but also it's a work in progress. I mean, it'll be cool to see how it evolves in the next couple of years. I mean, this is probably still super early. And so it's like a kind of a live story we can all track in real time.
Well, what I love about this is people that listen to the interview after our little intro here, we keep teasing hey, tell us what you're working on next. There's a couple of points where we're needling him, and now listeners will actually know what's going on. So the mystery has been revealed.
We didn't actually know either when we did this interview. In fairness to ourselves, this wasn't some massive ploy to hide this. We were also a little bit in the dark. So
we're keep all things close to chest.
Enlightened to this business now.
I thought that comment about how hiring a team held him back was really interesting. And I think he had a little bit of a grass is greener thing going on, because he was like, yeah, if I did it again, I would have gone to a big successful tech company in order to build my network to recruit people better. And I think just building a team is hard, full stop. Right. And there's all these people that work for successful companies, and you hire them because you think you're going to 10x your company, and they end up being kind of mediocre people that surf the wave really well. And so I just think had he done that, it still would have been hard, right? Like it's always hard to compile that
Yeah.
team in the early stages. It's always hard because, you have 10 people, and if one isn't great, that's like a 10% bad apple rate, right? And so I think he's right, and I totally believe him, but I don't think there's an easy way to do it. Was one of my reactions listening to the
No,
interview.
and there's plenty of companies that there's been a lot more companies that I know of that have spun out of big tech companies and have this stack team, and it looks great on paper, and it just doesn't work. There's no secret sauce on that front. I mean, the trade-off is you're hiring a bunch of people that are used to making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and clocking in from 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or 8 to 8. I mean, but they're not working 24/7 on this business. And for someone like Ethan or any number one of our founders, like they demand that. That's what they want people to do, and it's just not a realistic expectation, obviously. And so almost always you're going to be like, oh, I could do better. I could find this person or this person. There's always something else you could push on it. But there was a line he had in this, and I remember it was where he talks about he, this decision around earned wage access, and he was looking at what Jason and Dave, another Restive portfolio company, was doing. And he calls out Jason saying that it's basically this is earned wage access product is growing really fast. And the team had built like a version of it. They could have rolled it out. And he's like, I was sitting there in my ivory tower and I'm like, I don't think this is good for customers. And he's like, in hindsight, I was wrong. I think that was to me a really interesting kind of illuminating position, because I do think, knowing him for a long time, early in those first few years, like he was never wrong. Like that was just like Ethan was never wrong about something. And I do think that shows kind of a depth of growth where it's like, maybe it wasn't just the team. It's just that I wasn't doing, like I was making mistakes as well. And I'm going to try to correct those mistakes, be more open, be more receptive to what the customers are looking for, and less dogmatic about what I want. And that I thought was a really interesting kind of mental evolution that he's
Yeah.
had.
There was another thread around that where he was talking about how he would try to get permission from the customer before every money movement, right? And the product eventually led to a point where, if the user gave you permission and it was safe to move the funds, Digit just did it in the background, which was kind of the magic of the product. But he also had this viewpoint that he needed permission every time. And he dug into the user data, realized that basically if they gave permission once it was safe to spend, they should do it. And that's what the users wanted. And that was like this unlock for the company. And so kind of on a similar thread, there was this thing that jumped out to me and the conversation with Ken Lin, where there's this little thing you do, and all of a sudden it's like you've hit this geyser and like oil is spilling out of the well, and you've kind of found that product market fit. And so like that was definitely the moment with him where he found it. And it's such a testament to like listening to your users, doing these micro experiments and kind of discovering what works, that I think is so important in the early phases.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a kind of a less is more thing. It's both Ken's story at Credit Karma about, them in doing this ad for like $50 and using employees, and Ethan just not asking. They're just doing less, and they're like, okay, what can I cut out of the product? What can I cut out of this process that allows me to get the essence of this out there? And I think for customers, for someone who's a consumer of either media or the product or really anything, it's almost easier to grasp what that is then. Sometimes you see these products are so complicated, there's so much going on. You're like, this is too much. I just want to press a button. And so, but that is a really difficult thing. And so in hindsight, you're like, oh yeah, that's so easy. But at the time, he still feels kind of silly, I think. Or kind of like,
It never feels obvious in the moment.
Yeah. We should do this.
Totally.
Yeah.
Cool.
So.
Well, I think that's a good segue to roll
right.
the interview. Enjoy.
Cool. All right. Thanks.
Ethan. Thank you, Ryan. Why don't you share a little bit, like, take us back to the start of your entrepreneurial journey. Like, how did you, Digit wasn't your first business. You had one before that, Flowtown. It'd be good to know, like, kind of how'd you get in the space? Talk about, those kind of early years working in tech, and what the journey was to Digit.
Yeah, sure. I want to share just a tiny bit about Digit to sort
Yeah.
of just encapsulate what we achieved. Digit ultimately helped around 3.5 million Americans save $9 billion with the product. The whole product was started to really help people manage their money better. And so it is the thing I'm most proud of having done. I didn't start Digit to make money. I didn't start Digit for there's obviously things that fuel the ego, but it was really about how can we build a product in technology that helps people. And it was an incredible journey. We were very fortunate to have a lot of luck, and we were very fortunate to have a great outcome and a great partner and Oportun in the end. And it was a 10-year part of my life, which was very brutal and hard for lots of reasons. But the outcome of just helping that many people it was all worth it. And so I just want to share that. Going back, for whatever reason, I just start projects. I didn't even know the word entrepreneur until I was in college, and they're like, "There's a thing called an entrepreneur." I'm like, "What's that bullshit? Like, I don't understand that." I just start projects, and so I started projects going all the way back to when I was 10 or 11, and I was selling software on eBay that was pirated, but it was like a way to create a project, and that was just my path. And it really wasn't until college I started to get a little bit more clear about this passion for finance. I mean, my obsession with finance started when I was 13, but it was like day trading my bar mitzvah money. I didn't know that would be like a career. Wasn't a great idea. And it really wasn't until college where I was like, okay, my first love was the computer and the internet. My second love is clearly finance. Maybe there's something I can do here. But it was years and years later before I ever got to actually start Digit. And I moved out to the Bay Area in 2008 as the whole world was melting because of the financial crisis. I actually couldn't get a job. And I moved out here because I had a video show at the time, another project, that was just talking about finance. And I was fortunate to get the show syndicated to an internet TV network. And through that, I got my first job at Cake Financial in 2008, which was a fintech. And that eventually led to me starting Flowtown, this other company. But I'm just sharing this hodgepodge because it was not linear. It was not like, here's what I'm going to go do. It's going to be perfect. It was just following this intuition and this excitement for different projects.
And briefly, what was Flowtown?
We built small business software that helped people market to their customers. And so this is, if you rewind time, which dates me a bit, this is sort of at the dawn of businesses using Facebook and Twitter and other social media to engage their customers. And there wasn't a clear way how to do that, right? This is like 2009. And so Flowtown was a tool where people could import their customer list, and we would show what social network their customers are on. Okay. And then you could create, drip campaigns and marketing campaigns and things like that. We ended up selling that business to a company called Demand Force. It was a much bigger company, much better at doing that. And then Demand Force was eventually acquired by Intuit very soon thereafter that.
Did you raise money for Flowtown?
Yeah, we raised a tiny bit of money, raised about $1.5 million.
And how did you do that? Was it just networking?
Oof.
Brute force?
It's a long story, but we just hustled. I mean, I moved here in 2008. I didn't know anybody. I had a eventual partner who moved here around 2008 from Canada, this guy, Dan Martell, who's a prolific entrepreneur and now personality on the internet. And we met, and we just had this chemistry, and we decided to start working together. And Dan was a force of will, and within 90 days, he knew everyone. In 2008, it was a small community, right? So he was like hanging out with Dave McClure, know who Ron Conway is, like just the people within that space, within that time, it was very accessible.
Yeah.
And through that, we met a guy named Travis Kalanick, who was the eventual founder and CEO of Uber. At the time, he wasn't. And we ended up in his apartment talking about Flowtown, and he gave us a lot of candid feedback about how bad our pitch was. But then he believed in us, and he wrote us our first check for $25,000. Oh, wow.
And so there's kind of hustle and then some good fortune there. I mean, skip ahead now. You grew that business, sold it, had an exit.
Yeah. We sold that business around $4.5 million, so it was a very small outcome, but it was life-changing at the time.
And you got money back for the investors. You made money. I mean, there's certainly an exit's an exit to a degree. How was that then when you tell us about the kind of impetus for Digit and then what that fundraise was like?
Yeah. So I'd gone through life for a long time, starting with some of my childhood. And my dad's an immigrant, a Holocaust survivor from the Soviet Union, from Lithuania. And so he came to America in the 70s and was very focused on making money to survive. And he was quite successful doing that. And so I grew up with this belief that making money is the goal. And so that was a real motivation until I sold Flowtown, because I realized that I was just as insecure of a person after making a bunch of money as I was before, and that it was actually quite an empty pursuit. And so it kind of put me in a little bit of a tailspin, it was like 26 or 27, where I was like, what am I doing with my life? I thought making money would make me very happy and secure, and it's not the case. And so I just sat, and it was actually somewhat of and you might hear this story. I'm entrepreneurs, more people talk about this, the better, but this is not a unique thing. I sort of sat in that space of what the fuck am I doing with my life? Is my language. And I slowly came back to this just real excitement for finance. And I shared a little bit about that before. And I started to think about, okay, like I could think about personal finance. I could help people with their personal finances every day because I just love it. I just love it. And I feel like I'm good at it. I feel like I have a unique perspective about it. I feel like I'm unbiased as much as I can be in helping people do that. And so I started to follow that thread. And I was like, okay, I started writing a book in college. Maybe I'll do that. And I was like, God, the world does not need another book on finance. That's not going to do much. It's not going to do much. And I started to think, well, I've been building software for, at that point, 5 or 6 years, teaching myself how to actually build software, working with engineers and designers. And I said, well, maybe I can build something that's software based that helps people with their money. And that was the sort of spark that eventually, a year or so later, led to a very early prototype of Digit that I just sort of had built and coded and started to share with friends, and kind of, I know it's cliche, but it kind of just took off from there.
And Digit, or just as a quick reminder, it was basically an app. You linked your bank accounts to it. It would scan your account and tell you, basically identify money that you might not miss, and kind of sweep that out. So there was, kind of a much more hybrid, like a much more advanced version of like a roundup kind of model. And so you launched that in 2014, 13?
We officially launched in 2015.
2015.
Yep.
And there's a story I'd wanted you to kind of talk about. I remember, and maybe this is apocryphal now, but where you originally were asking people if you could sweep money. Like you'd identify that there was money to sweep.
Yeah. So early in the development of Digit, as all products, you think you have it right, and you get customer feedback, and you realize you have some stuff really wrong. One of the things with Digit was, again, it would study your cash flow. It would say, okay, hey Ryan, you could save $15 today. And it would actually text you, do you want to save it? And what we would see in the user behavior is they would usually say yes the first time. And the second time they would ignore it or say no. Again, this is generalized. And then we would stop. It would stop saving. And so we're screwed. The product doesn't work. We have to change everything. And it's like, okay, hang on. Let's just talk to the customers. And it's like, what's going on? And it's like, well, if you know it's safe to save $15, just move the money. And we're like, oh, brilliant. And so we removed this check, this gate of like, do you want to do it? And it just worked. And people started saving tons of money. Like in our beta, I think we were saving several $1,000s a year per customer. And this went down as we got a more normal distribution of the US population, but it just worked.
Yeah.
It worked so well. There were so many things we wanted to do at Digit that we never got to do.
Yeah. So, presumably that first fundraise wasn't super competitive. It was particularly difficult for you, I'm guessing, because you had already had a successful exit.
We were very fortunate. I mean, it was the same investors, really the same lead investor from Flowtown, Steve Anderson at Baseline Ventures, invested in the first check in Digit.
So you're able to kind of get through that first gate of raising. You brought, I think you had a lot of the same team members too from Flowtown. You were able to.
That I did not.
Okay.
Yeah, we were a very small team at Flowtown. Everyone sort of scattered after that. Some started companies, so I had to rebuild a team from scratch.
And how was any lessons or learnings or perspective on that now?
Man, building a team from scratch is so hard, and probably for any startup, it's maybe equal weight, but one of the most important things. I wish in hindsight I had spent more time at great technology companies as an employee,
Okay.
because that's where you're going to build the network to draw upon. Um, it was brutal. I mean, building the right team ultimately held back the success of Digit. It took us a long time to build the right team.
When do you think you got there?
I think we did get there in the end, but it was at the expense of the ultimate sort of outcome of the company. It was too late, quite frankly. We built the right team, but it was too late.
Um,
And again, this is my version of it.
yeah.
I'm sure there's many versions, but I've thought a lot about it, and I think that's one of the biggest. That was one of the biggest sort of draws against our success.
Any other like regrets or thoughts where you're like, man, I can't believe we did it that way for so long?
We were too, yeah, for sure. And I struggle with this one, but again, I started Digit with as pure of a motive you could have. Let's help people financially. Turns out that's really hard to do in financial services because there's so many second order and third order consequences to product decisions. But we tried to uphold this, through it all. We were so crazy that we were like, hey, we're going to charge for the product because if we can't, we're going to have to advertise. And if we have to advertise, we're going to be biased. And so let's not do that. And, we got a lot of shit for charging and we lost half our customers. It worked. We built a business doing $50 million a year in revenue from that. But as an example, one thing I think we should have been less ideological. There was a point in 2017, 2018, where we had built an early version of a cash advance product at Digit. We were testing it, inspired by Jason and Dave. I think they were just, in the next cohort. We're like, okay, let's see if we could do it. And we had a product and it worked. And I was in a meeting and it was not clear to me this would actually help the consumer long term. Now, the consumer wanted it, clearly, but it wasn't clear to me. So I was up in this ivory tower making some decision that this is not good for the customer. And I think I was wrong. I think at the end of the day, I think we were wrong. And it, again, also limited the potential of Digit because of this ideological belief that in the long run, it might not help the customer. I think it's too, it's kind of insulting, to be honest, to take that perspective about what your customer is telling you. Now, it's one thing to do something clearly predatory, and sometimes it's hard to tell what's gray, but in this case, this was more gray, and I think it led us a bit astray, and it limited our growth, limited our potential.
And so kind of skipping ahead to the acquisition, was that driven by an awareness on your part that it was time to sell, that you saw a limited growth? Was it opportunistic where you saw a good synergy between Oportun? Like what was a driver to that? And then I'd love to hear about kind of how your role changed throughout that acquisition, kind of how it changed you and how you think about the experience in the business.
Yeah, it was very opportunistic. I had known Raul, the CEO of Oportun, for years and had a great deal of respect for him and the company. And we would catch up, I don't know, every quarter on life and on business. And at one of these catch-ups, he presented the idea of like, hey, maybe we should buy Digit and integrate it and build this together. And initially, I thought that was not a good idea for all the obvious reasons of not being independent anymore. And after considering it maybe for a month or two, I called him back and said, hey, this is like, let's explore this. And we actually ran a competitive process. Our board asked us, hey, this is great. You want to do this deal with Oportun, but you have to run a process. And so we actually hired a banker. We worked with Steve at FT Partners, and we ran a full process. And we had several competing offers. And ultimately, Oportun was not the highest price, but it was the best place for Digit.
How was the post acquisition? How was that process of integrating?
It was very hard.
Was it harder than building the business, or?
It's different. No, not harder than building the business because it's not as existential. At least it wasn't as existential. Oportun was a much larger organization, operating in a very different way. And so getting the companies integrated and merged was very difficult. And there's many things we could have done better, I think, in hindsight. And Raul and I did sort of the best we could to try to get it done. And what really helped was crystallizing around this concept of a unified app, bring everything together in a single app. And that really got people on the same team, and that app exists today, and that app is still doing well today. But until we had that clarity, it was unclear what the organizing factor was. And when you bring two organizations together, even within one organization, there's always competing priorities. When you bring two separate ones together, lots of competing priorities. And so without a singular goal to drive everyone around, it was a little bit chaotic.
When does Oportun still charge for Digit? Is it still a monthly fee?
Yeah. I don't know their exact pricing. Maybe if you have one of their loans, it's free, or you get a free period, maybe a year or two of using it. I can't remember. I don't know what it is now.
Yeah. So you had this business that went through this, really grew. You grew through like this really interesting phase of fintech. So where it wasn't a thing, like there was not like a concept of fintech, and then I think
Ken and Credit Karma, they were early in this initial wave. I mean, this is like the post PayPal kind of squares in between, but then beyond that, it's Credit Karma, and there's not much else. And then Digit and Robinhood and Chime and Dave, and it was like.
But you're going to investors and you're like, I have a tech company that does something with money, and they're like, whatever. Like, there's a tech company.
Oh my God, it was
It's not like there aren't fintechs. There aren't a ton of fintech specialists out there.
There were people who got it. There are many people, most who did not.
And then you go through this period where
And they would say, by the way, like, cool, but like, where are the big outcomes in fintech? And they would go, okay, PayPal, Elon and Peter, okay, that doesn't count. You'd be like, okay, Square. Square at that point was not Square today. It was unclear. Their public offering was less than their actual last private financing. So they would say, where are the outcomes? Well, the outcomes came. We went through a correction, but they did come. But that's what we would hear. Where are the outcomes? We don't believe in this.
And so how do you look at it now, like bringing it kind of forward to the market we're in today? Like, AI obviously would have had a huge impact on what the Digit experience was.
Yeah.
But are there other elements of the market now that you think of that are just fundamentally different than before, that are like what is your kind of sense of like what is the opportunity set in kind of fintech or tech businesses in the financial services space today?
I'm not sure it's so different. I mean, at the end of the day, it starts with what problem are you solving for who, and how many of those people are there. I'm not sure that has changed. It's definitely more. It depends again if you look at it from consumer fintech versus more B2B fintech. Consumer fintech is brutal. I don't recommend anyone do it unless they really have the only reason is because they have to do it. Don't do it if it's like, oh, this is going to be fun, or I hope I make money, or no, it's a terrible profession, terrible industry to go into.
Presumably the new business is also a consumer.
Mine is, but
So-
yeah.
But it's just like a sadistic kind of.
Well, yeah, it's true. True.
If
it's really
people,
for you.
everyone says that, and you just listed off a bunch of outcomes though, and most of those outcomes are direct to consumer businesses. I mean, that's one of those things that's hard to reconcile about.
This isn't just true in consumer in general, right? Like the outcomes are bigger, the volatility is bigger. B2B, the outcomes are smaller, the volatility is lower. It maps into fintech as well. But consumer fintech's just really, really competitive, which makes it a little bit different, I think, because you're competing against the banks. They'll tell you, they don't do a bunch of stuff well, but they're massive. Everyone has an account already. You're competing against the new fintechs, of the world, and then you're competing against tons of smart people working on things. And then separately, you have just this hyper fragmented customer. Different, there's such a difference between customers. It's not just like, oh, by income or by profession per se, but just like, are they self-employed?
Yeah.
Do they have a job but have a small business? It's just like the way you can get lost in who you're serving is really infinite in consumer finance.
And do you think like kind of AI or LLMs have an obvious use case in consumer fintech? There's some questions around like the actual numbers, but do you think that fundamentally changes anything? Does that make it easier? Does that change the landscape of, certainly it's more difficult for banks and large incumbents to roll some of these products out.
Yeah.
Does that shift it towards the tech companies, towards a startup in a way that is more favorable?
It might. I think this is, this is obvious. I mean, we're in San Francisco. So like LLMs and AI, it's changing everything. Like if you're not, and I'm just sound like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid because I am. I'm using the products every day. Like if you're not seeing how fast it's changing everything in knowledge work, everything in building software, everything in doing design, you gotta go see that. And then that is just gonna lift all the boats. It's gonna lift the boats of the banks. It's gonna lift the boats of the fintechs. It's gonna lift the boats of everyone who's competing in any market. And then there are a set of novel experiences that couldn't be built before that an LLM enables, certainly in finance. It could be back office, right? It also could be customer facing. Um, it's going to be, you know, we'll wake up at some point soon and wonder how it was ever like it is today in consumer finance and in finance in general. And it's unclear who will win that. Maybe Chase and their work on the their LM figures some of that stuff out. Maybe it's a B2B company that figures something out and sells it. Maybe it's a B2B company that's selling software to advisors and helps them do it. But it is an incredible time to figure out how it will get applied.
Are you building this business differently than you built Digit because of some of these tools?
Well, we're certainly building it differently in that, the company I started last year was started really as a research project with the question of, is it possible? And if we give ourselves 18 months to say if it's possible or not. And if it's not possible, we would just shut it down and go do something else because our time is way too valuable. And so that's quite different than Digit. Digit was like, this has to work. My financial security is wrapped up in this. It has to work. This is a very different premise.
What do you think that says about the business? Like, is it? I mean, I hear that and I'm like, well, he's not super into it. Like, it doesn't the same. It feels like the first one, you got it all on the line.
Well, no, I don't.
Do you think how much does that motivation matter?
Oh, it's not. It's well, for what it's worth, my time and capacity on what this project is, it just keeps ramping. So like we think it's working. And so my energy and effort continues to increase. There's only so much. So we were very fortunate in the current company to quickly build a great team.
Yeah.
There's only so much I can do as someone who no longer writes code. And so I'm not an engineer. This is very much an engineering problem. And so I can point and talk to my team and my partner on what we should be doing, but I can only do so much. They have to actually invent this thing, and I can help problem solve. But until they invent it, there's not much I can do. And I liken this back, in some ways, it's not a great example, but I remember when Travis started Uber, he was not the CEO. He hired a guy named Ryan Graves to be the CEO. And him and Garrett said, go see if there's something here. And when it started to be clear that there was very much something there, his time and energy would ramped up, and he ended up taking over the CEO on the Uber story. I'm not Travis, and this is not Uber, but I think there's something to that. Again, if you're not an engineer and you're doing a technology company, there's only so much you can do in the beginning. Talk to customers, make sure the problem's right, motivate the team. And then once you start to solve it, then there's a lot more to be done.
So it sounds like you maybe don't have the same schizophrenic attention to detail that you had in Digit.
Oh, I still have that. You should talk to the team. Yeah, I'm annoying,
But it's more controlled annoyance. It's not as emotional driven.
It's like, it's high level. What's the vision? Maniacal. Where are we going? Why does that matter? Like that really matters. How you tell the story. Okay. And then what's it look like?
Yeah.
What's it like? Let's not talk about what it looks like. Like, what does it actually look like to the customer? These are my two strengths. Everything in between, I'm terrible at. Which makes me also a terrible manager.
Right. Well, we got a couple minutes for questions. Is anyone? Oh, there we go. You can wait for microphone, unfortunately. But Elizabeth, there's one.
Or yell.
Back from. Oh, there you go.
I wanted to know more about how you rectified the delta between with Digit, you're serving a customer who is very much unlike your investor. And I find that early fintech, you think about PayPal, Square, those companies, everyone can benefit from those products. Now, as fintech gets more mature, you're getting these bifurcated products where there's a gap between the person you're serving and the person that's funding what's being built. And so how would you coach founders on relaying that difference to investors so they can understand that, hey, this isn't you, but this is a big market, even if on first blush you don't necessarily see it and identify or relate to that problem?
The good investors will get it. There's lots of not good investors, though. At the end of the day, good investors are capitalists. They want to make money. There's a market or there isn't, and they can see that. Now, they may not have the life experience to see it, but the good ones can see it if you tell the story well. Now, they may have skepticism how big the market is, and that is up to you to convince them otherwise. Or it's also up to you to have the numbers game on how many you're pitching. But Digit, for an example, we early in the seed round, we had some of it figured out, but we were going to pitch someone who was a very well-known, prominent Bay Area sort of luminary, you could say. And we're in his house in Woodside, and we're talking through Digit, and he just like looks at us and he goes, "I've never seen a company be really successful that helps stupid people." And we were like, "Wait, what?" And he's like, "Well, I walk my kids through how to do the balance sheet and how to do this income statement, and my daughter doesn't understand it." I'm like, "So wait a minute, you're calling your daughter stupid?" We got kind of like, that did not go well. But he was much older. I think he was truly out of touch, and that was it. And he's also a great investor. If I said his name, you'd be like, okay, that guy's a great investor. That will happen. But by and large, the great investors, they can see great opportunity. And it's ultimately a numbers game for you on how many you're pitching.
Test? Okay. Hi, I'm Armand. I'm co-founder and CEO at Ready. We enable companies to offer retirement benefits for their international team. My question is, thinking back, you started Digit in 2015, and around that time, if I recall, like companies like Plaid that allowed you to get access to bank accounts were relatively new.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, were there any financial infrastructure problems you had to overcome, and how did you do that?
So many. Well, we started actually with a company called Yodlee. And for those who've been in fintech for a while, they'll know that name. We were fortunate to meet Zach and William very early on in Plaid and started using them. And we were one of their first customers, and that made things a lot better from an integration perspective. But we also moved money at Digit. That was the harder part. There are better solutions today, albeit it sounds like there's quite a retreat in BaaS and banking as a service. We had to do deals with banks. We integrated with their archaic HCH systems to move money. We had to build all that infrastructure in-house. Ultimately, it was a competitive advantage because it's extremely low cost. We could move money from point A to point B anywhere in the United States for a fraction of a penny. But that all had to get built, from the ground up. There was no off-the-shelf product, which at scale, I think still makes sense to build it yourself, again, depending what you're doing. But to get started, to prototype, it's a real impediment to innovate when you're just trying to prototype because there was nothing off the shelf. Today, I think you could prototype much faster, which is great, which is a great opportunity. Makes it easier.
Thanks.
Questions? Well, Ethan, with that, I guess I'll ask the final one here. You've got the room full of founders. I mean, many of the founders in this room are pretty early in their cycle. Might not actually be able to find great investors. I mean, in fairness, that being in the room of the guy in Woodside was a nice touch, So when you are kind of take yourself back to probably close to the Flowtown experience and like starting out there, kind of knowing everything, now, encapsulate, 15-year career in tech. What's like the one piece of advice you give people when they're at that real first stage?
Oh, I don't know. I don't like this question. I mean, there is no single piece of advice. I think, what I would say, and something I'm trying to do now, is if you're an entrepreneur and you just need someone to give you some feedback, to help you, to provide some light mentorship, to introduce you to people, you should email me. And my email is ethan.bloch@gmail.com. I very much feel like I'm at a place now where, I am giving my time back. I still have a lot to do ahead, but I've been so fortunate in my career through people who believed in me, like yourself, Tom Brown, somewhere in here, like him being in his office when I had no idea how fintech worked. Just this gift of people helping you, it really, if you're talented and you're on that talent path, having people help you is an X factor. And so I don't have advice, but if you're talented and you're working on something, please email me. And I'm more than happy to get on a 10-minute phone call, 15-minute phone call, and help however I can.